So hello everyone, we are here in the video blog of the South American Mycorrhizal Research Network. This section is called What We Are Reading. And in this month, we have something a little bit different because we are talking about an initiative of soil sampling at the global scale. This is based in one recent science paper. So to talk about that, we have here to Diana Wall from Colorado State University and Carlos Guerra from the German Center of Integrative Biodiversity. Sorry if I changed the name a little bit. So hi to both of you. If you want to start saying something, my first question would be, what is soil bond, and which are the objectives of this observation network?
Thank you, Cesar, for inviting us. I think I will answer that. And we established Soil Bond, which is a soil biodiversity observation network. And it's under the umbrella of the Group on Earth Observations, the Biodiversity Observation Network, which is a much larger global above and below ground organization. And the reason we wanted this is we want to be able to systematically collect and sample data worldwide and understand the condition of soil biodiversity and the ecosystem functions in soil. So we're trying to produce the first globally standardized time series over time on the condition of soil biodiversity and ecosystem functions. And we were able to do this because we have partners in multiple institutions, volunteers who will systematically assess with us, and we will work with everybody to look at these in protected and unprotected areas. Because the thing we want to get to is not only what is the status now, and then look at it over time, but we want to see if some of these management practices that are above ground, are they really conserving, or do we see change below ground in all the soil organisms there?
And how was this observation network started? How it was formed? Who is involved? And how can anyone participate?
Okay, well, I'm going to kind of break that up, and hopefully Carlos will step in here and answer some of it. This network was, I guess I would call it a grassroots initiative of scientists, led, once the Soil Bond was formed, a number of us got together and said, what can we measure? How will we figure this out? And we were able to do it because everybody, I think, is so enthusiastic about getting data that we've never had before on a global level. We were able to decide on some of these parameters that we would be measuring in soil and of the organisms in about 3 days of thinking about this. And as for your next question, I'm going to throw that to pass that on to my colleague, Carlos.
Thank you, Diana. So as Diana said, we are an open network where everyone can participate, and by everyone, it's everyone that has an interest. So we have 2 levels, let's say, of participation, or maybe 3. One is the level that, for example, me and Diana are, where we actually committed funds and our own resources to be able to do some analysis on soils. And the idea here is that all the soils that we collect, a specific lab does one analysis or more on all of the soils. So we have a standardized approach, the same analytical approach, the same lab doing the same analysis for all. This means that our lab is doing one thing and Diana's lab is doing something else, but to the same soils and in a standard way. Another way that one can participate is by mobilizing a specific community. For example, in your case, you are participating in Soil Bond by mobilizing or by trying to mobilize Latin American colleagues that can contribute, actively contribute to this network, either by sending soils or participating in with their own research in this community. And a third way to participate on this is to help us mobilize these soil samples. And by doing this, you are benefiting in two ways. So you are benefiting in the way that someone else is doing an analysis on your soils in a very specific way and across different aspects of the soil. But you are also benefiting by having your samples in the context of others. So let's say that in the future, someone wants to do work on global forests. What is happening within forest sites across the world for soils? This is there. If let's say that someone wants to do something on the transition between a grassland and forest across a specific biome, hopefully this will also be there. So people can take advantage of the information that we are using to explore their own questions. And by actively participating in this network, they are helping us creating this potential backbone for researchers, for them and for others.
I will leave the link of Soilborne in the description of this video so people can participate and join. Carlos, can you tell us a little bit the main conclusion of our science paper of this year called Tracking, Targeting, and Conserving Soil Biodiversity?
Sure. I'll share a bit. Maybe before going to the conclusions, I would like to point to maybe what I was referring first, that is how we are approaching soils. Diana said it very well. It's very hard right now to get, even for one time step, but for more than one, information on both biodiversity and ecosystem functions. And this is the step that we are trying to take. So on the left side of this figure, you have all the functional aspects that we are trying to address, and on the right side you'll see most of the diversity aspects, although mixed with some chemical and physical aspects also that we are trying to observe. The main, more than the conclusion for this science paper, what we aim is to call on other researchers that have the same worries as we have to participate together with us in this task. This is not something that we are doing, so this is not directly funded by any government, by any research institute. This is funded as a cluster. So everyone believes in the project and everyone believes that the outcomes of this project will be of much interest, both for research, but also to the protection of these animals and microbes. So if you want a conclusion, that's the main conclusion. We have to target soil biodiversity in a very specific way as a conservation target. So as a nature conservation target, not only because you want to stop erosion, not only because you want to increase carbon stocks, it's because they are special animals and microbes that deserve our attention and deserve our protection, as the same as an eagle or something else.
That's absolutely important because always in the discussions in the global discussions about soil, you always hear like compactation or pollution or avoiding erosion. But yes, it's time that we also add the biodiversity component. Here in the slide, there is this term, essential biodiversity variable. Can you explain what is that about?
So actually, again, Diana already mentioned this before. So Soilborne is a part of GeoBond, and GeoBond is again a part of Geo. These are many acronyms, but they basically translate that what we want is to find across the world and across topics, from risk assessment to even population to biodiversity. What we want is to find a set core of variables, of things to measure that can be measurable, that in our case are biodiversity related and can be tracked through time. And these things, uh, they are not the things to measure. These are just a priority list in terms of what we can do at the moment, what we can put our resources in at the moment. And this also brings me to how you can participate. We were able to put together this collection of variables, but for sure others will have their own pet animals and their own pet functions. And if resources allow, we are more than welcoming for those initiatives. So essential variables are that is a set of uh, things, measurable things about biodiversity or ecosystem functions that we can track through time. And then they can be collected as informative indicators. That is also something that we want to in the future have for soils.
Also, I think that it's important to reiterate that in this science paper, in the supplements, there are like specific methods to measure each one of these things. Um, Also, I think that something important in the future is like to assess how to relate each one of these variables with each other. How are these interactions between these different variables?
Sure,
Um,
but Cesar, sorry to interrupt you because you mentioned the methods. Um, Most of the methods, I have to say, are from a very um, European American point of view. Um, this does not mean, and we are completely aware that some colleagues in other countries, even within Europe, do not have maybe the same resources or the same methodological approaches as we are having to do this. uh, this does not mean that we are not open to other approaches, to other methods, to other things. The list that you mentioned in the science paper is the one that we are committed to do in a transparent way, listing the ways that we are measuring all these things. But for example, I'm participating in a group to measure carbon. And to measure carbon, there are many, many different ways of measuring carbon. Some of them are very expensive and maybe not exactly the most correct. Some of them are very environmentally friendly, and some of them are just popular. So the ones that we are putting in is not the best method. That's not what we mean with that. Is the one that we are able to provide. That means that if other people want to provide other ways of approaching the same soils, the same measurements in a different way, but in a standard way for all the samples that we have, we'll try at least to provide them with the samples for that.
Perfect, absolutely clear. Also, you mentioned before, Diane, I think that mentioned before that, and we published in the Nature Communication paper that of continental and global scale studies, just like in 0.3% of all these plots of thousands and thousands, I think like 17,000 plots around the world, just in 0.3, both biodiversity and ecosystem functions are studied at the same time. So my question for both of you is like, why this happens? Why this like disconnect between these both aspects and both things that are very important and that should be studied together?
Go ahead, Carlos.
Okay, but then I would hope that you can add to this. So just a correction, our study was aimed at trying to look at microecological studies,
Yeah.
because there are studies at plot level side or local scale that do work in both diversity and function. What we were trying to look was to studies that look at macroecological scales, if they were capturing these two aspects or not. From a very technical point of view, this is very expensive. It's very, very expensive to do even biodiversity, even with current methods of DNA, it's quite expensive to do it. So if you add to that all the chemical and physical analysis that you have to do, it's even more expensive. And if you put on top of that the functions, it becomes imperative for many studies to do it. So I would say that that's one of the main reasons. The second reason is that it's also very hard to even to transport soils from Chile or Colombia to Germany, for example. Very hard, not only from the price point of view, but also from the legal point of view. So when people do these studies, they try to minimize, and it's human nature, it's also the resources nature, they try to minimize their investments and try to get the most out of it. It's not a matter of people not having a research interest. It's just a matter of limitation of resources, I would say. And maybe Diana, you have a different opinion on this.
I agree. And I think that the striking thing, again, to come back to why I think Soil Bond is going to be so useful, I'm hopeful, very hopeful it's going to be useful for not only for scientists, but for managers at, say, regional scales or local scales, or comparing forests, like we mentioned before, or different types of management systems, because we're going to have data that's going to be on this time series. And even though there are some places, as Carlos mentions, that we have that has been one barrier. But I think there's also, and I want to reemphasize this disconnect between molecular and what people have done historically, morphologically, evolutionarily for 100 years, looking at soil biology. And so the chance also to use this blind spot paper to show what is absent, what are the gaps, and what is needed by policymakers, that is the next step. And so that's why I think it's so important to link our lack of knowledge below ground to actually the urgency of how do we manage soils worldwide.
Yes, you touched on the last two things that I want to talk about, which is this soil bond, how long it will last, which will be the global reach. So that's the first question. It's a quick one.
So for how long it will last, I think the two vectors to reply to that question is that people still feel that commitment. So that people still feel that they take out something from this project, even though they are investing their own money. And to this, I think it would be helpful if we find other sources of funding this initiative, either through research projects or more institutional commitments. But the other vector of this is if politicians see the value of this, and when I say politicians is not in a general way, is directly our target. So if CBD and other high-level policy institutions or initiatives see the value on such a platform. Right now, we are still a research facility, and we will remain like that because there's where our interest comes from. But there will be a point where, although we can still maintain this as a research initiative, someone else, not us probably, will have to put this into operation. And to put this into operation it's not based on volunteer work, at least I would say. And that transition will happen, I hope, in the future, not now. Right now we are, I would say, good research initiative.
Perfect. And you both have talked about something extremely important, which is the policy implications of all of this, of the recent FAO report and of both papers. what is your hope with this? What is your hope in regards of policy changes?
I think for me, what I'm really hopeful, and I think the awareness is growing, is that the ecosystem functions that are performed by the soil animals are really important to human and life well-being above ground that we see. And into, it has ties to the soils, and soils and sediments are linked to these organisms. And so I think from what this observation network, the data will show not only comparisons for scientists, but it will help policymakers and higher level conserve these important organisms that are doing important functions. And right now, we're just starting to gain that understanding for how do we conserve, preserve spots, preserve these biota, and not lose them because we don't know exactly where they are or what are they doing.
Yeah. To add to that, I would say just that for me, I would like to participate so in 10 years from now, I would like to meet you all again and being able to say that I participated in something that allowed nations to run their own programs of monitoring soils based on our standards, for example, because we also have published standards for sampling soils that is adequate for the methods that we use. We try to make our methods transparent for others to use them or to use a version of them if necessary. And I will also be very happy if in 10 years from now, soil organisms directly, not because of their instrumental value for services for us, but soil organisms directly would made it to be the target of a few conservation areas around the world. If that would happen, so if conservation areas would target these animals or microbes and would try to value them the same way that they value old oaks, for example, or eagles or things like this, I would be very, very happy. And I would say that's the transition policy that I hope for.
That's amazing. That's quite great. With that, there is something else that you want to say to finish our interview?
I'm okay.
Okay, so thank you very much to both of you. It was a great interview, and see you all people of my network in the
Hopefully.
interview.
See you later then.
Bye-bye.